Hello, everyone. My name is Christina, and on behalf of myosh, I want to welcome you all here with us. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, Revolutionise Risk Management with AI. We are so excited to have you here because what we're about to explore isn't just an upgrade, it's a complete shift in how we think about risk. Let's be honest, traditional risk assessments, they're often slow, repetitive, and sometimes we might just skip them altogether. But what if AI could do the heavy lifting for you? Today, we are diving into how AI-powered critical control management and bowtie visualization are transforming risk management, not just in safety, but across finance, operations, and beyond. Now, our presenter is Adrian Manessis, the architect behind myosh's groundbreaking CCM module. He'll show you how AI can automatically generate, review, and enhance bowtie diagrams and risk assessments, tailored specifically to your organisations and ready to go in seconds. Now, throughout the session, as always, I encourage you to use the chat box, ask questions, share your insights, and engage with us live. We'll be answering your questions as we go throughout. And if we've got time, a little Q&A session at the end. So settle in, stay curious, and get ready to rethink how risk is managed in your business faster, smarter, and more accurately than ever before. Over to you, Adrian.
Thank you, Christina. I'm going to be running a small presentation today, followed by mainly practical examples of how we can apply this. A statement that I'm seeing frequently is ignoring AI could render workers and companies irrelevant. AI is transforming every field. Rapid adoption is required to stay competitive. So what it's saying is you need to be using AI, but the problem is how do you use AI? How do you get staff to use AI? How can we do it more effectively? And that's what I'd like to show you today. So a lot of people make that statement, and very similar sorts of statements. Sometimes it's a little bit of hype and sometimes it's a little bit over the top, but it's not completely. To be competitive, you do need to be optimizing efficiencies, and AI is a good way of doing that. So I'm just going to work through a brief presentation. So I'm not going to bore you to death with PowerPoint. What I'd like to do is just talk about it in general terms with not too much text on the slides, and then actually go into some examples. And people have given, I've spent a fair bit of time going through your examples and your companies, the companies that have joined the webinar today, so I can try to keep it as relevant as possible. So looking at the PowerPoint, barriers to risk assessments. So there's AI and there's risk assessments. Christina touched on some of these things. It's typically perceived as fairly tedious. If I sort of said, how do you feel like getting up and doing a risk assessment? That should be a bit of fun, shouldn't it? And the answer is generally no. People have to think. They don't like to think. They have to concentrate. They're busy. Trying to get a culture of people doing risk assessments is actually difficult. They're time poor. They don't have the skills. They don't have the knowledge to do it. And sometimes there's just lack of software to actually put the results into the information you want to store. So there's some of the barriers. AI can help you overcome it. It doesn't solve everything, and it does in fact introduce a few new things you've got to think about as well. So it'll think of things that you don't. So one of the things that I've found through doing risk assessments through AI is it comes up with a very broad list of items that I would never have even considered. And I've even worked with organisations in specific industries where I've built a risk model with them without any knowledge myself, but just facilitated it. They built the appropriate information, but when we got the AI to do it, it actually produced, even though they're very, very experienced, it produced a lot more information that they hadn't thought of. So it complements. So the information they did think of was still useful, but it was also often done with the AI as well. But it made it far more comprehensive. It's also efficient. It's fast to do. You can get it to do most of the heavy lifting. You can then just improve it thereafter. It's a lot easier to not start with a blank page and to start with something that's already there and critique it. So it won't always get it right, but at least you can look at it and say, okay, that's got it 80% right. Let's delete certain things. Let's add extra things. The next one might be a bit of a stretch, but personally, I actually think it's fun when you're using the tool, because you can just put in a whole series of scenarios. You can actually have fun with it. It builds it so quickly. If you get it wrong, you can just get it generated again. It makes it a far more enjoyable process. And the other thing that I'll show you today is it can be systemized. So the information that comes out of it can be pushed into a system with workflows, reminders, dashboards that present information, and so on. Why don't people use it? Because they don't have those systems that systemize it. Sometimes they might have something like ChatGPT or Gemini, and they just produce a whole lot of data. They don't know where it goes or how they have to copy and paste it. A lot of work. And the infrastructure is not there to do it. So you end up going, well, I may as well just do it manually. The skills. There is some skills required sometimes in using AI. If you don't prompt it with the right information, you won't get the right information out. So you've got to have predefined prompts. You've got to have the information already defined in the system to help with that. Understanding where and how it can be applied. So looking at different people, one person will go, yeah, I'm comfortable, I can see how it can be applied. But a lot of people, they haven't grown up with it. They don't necessarily see the application of it and how to apply it. So they often just go off and do their own thing. So if you've got an organization and you're trying to get them to use AI, if you're to say, I want you to use AI, but they draw a blank. They often don't sort of know what they could do and where they could use it. Well, they might find some use cases, but not as many as they should. People often also don't use it due to privacy concerns. So they're concerned that their data can be used to train models and to be, accessed on the internet. And that's a valid concern, why people aren't using it. And I know that a lot of companies are restricting access to things like ChatGPT or Gemini because they're worried about their IP being distributed. And to be quite frank, a lot of these AI companies, in fact, haven't really worked in the most ethical way, where they've just gone and grabbed data. There's some lawsuits out there at the moment between Anthropic and one of the other companies, where they've just gone through and taken their data, and not a specific company, but another IT company. And the data privacy concerns are there. The solution, configurable use cases. So we're in the software industry. What we like to do is we like to put AI embedded into specific instances. So our software is a configurable platform. We have AI configuration coming into the platform. And the idea behind embed AI into workflows. So you put a field into a form, we can embed AI into forms. So as you do things, the forms can help you do them based on what your workflows are. A good example of that, moving away from risk for a moment, is an incident investigation. If you've got the sequence of events, wouldn't it be great to be able to press a button and the system tells you what are the questions we should be asking as a result of this incident, which produced those sequence of events? And then could you come up with a root cause analysis, lessons learned, ICAM investigation, and produce that for me to review and modify? Now, that's all well and good if you know how to use ChatGPT and you know how to prompt it. But if you've got those things embedded into your forms and the prompts predefined, and all the user has to do is click a button, then it makes it a lot easier and a lot less intimidating for users to work with. And that's where we're heading, and that's what we're working on. Okay, so it allows you to easily add use cases for very specific purposes, whether it's incident investigation, whether it's defining what are the things we need to consider when we're doing this task, what are the risks, what are the hazards, etc. Okay, today I'm going to focus more on bow ties. Now, I appreciate that people are doing crawls and they're doing other types of risk assessments, and we will have other webinars coming up where we tackle other types of risk assessments, like SWIMs and JHAs and those sorts of things. Task type risk assessments. But today we're going to look at the bow ties, and the bow ties are the more complex ones and the ones that people find the hardest to do as well. So one of the things you can do is completely automate it, but still monitor it and review it and make sure it hasn't hallucinated. You can go through, you can produce, and this is where we're talking about data integration and infrastructure, the data that it produces. So rather than just being a whole lot of text that comes out of ChatGPT, you want it to be producing data that can be looked at in dashboards. And that's, again, another thing that we'll look at. You can drill down on that data and you can report on it and so forth. So we're also looking at a holistic approach. So I know that we're typically known for safety, but this approach can be looked at holistically across the organisation. So it's not just for WHS risks and not even just for critical risks. It can be used for any type of risk. One of the barriers with bow ties is they're quite sort of time consuming to do. They take a lot of subject matter knowledge and a lot of effort. And you might have a lot of people in a room trying to come up with one. When the AI can build it for you, you can do more of them, and the risk assessment process can be a lot more broader. So I was talking to a customer recently, and we were actually showing the AI side of things. And we started moving into financial risks, and we started looking at cybersecurity risks. We started looking at all sorts of things. And then they realised that they could be using it for a lot more and manage risks across the entire organisation, not just in the WHS space. Okay, so the solution, secure AI models. One of the things that we're looking at is making it so you can actually set the model that it looks at. So not all models, AI models, are produced equally. Some will take your data and use it to train their models. Some can be set not to do that. And other ones are open source that can be completely separate and run inside a closed environment. So that can, by providing those options, what it allows is for you to have full ownership and oversight of the data, and to make sure that your data doesn't end up on the internet and being used by people who shouldn't see it. Okay, so that's the end of the PowerPoint presentation. What I'd like to do is just talk about the risk models. Now, what I've done today and what we tried to do with this presentation and what we'd like to encourage is, if you've got something that you want me to build a bow tie for, and I'll talk exactly what a bow tie is for those who haven't used them in a few moments' time. But if you want me to look at a risk area and you want me to look at a scenario, I'm more than happy to do that. Now, what I've done as part of today's session is I've put together a series of different types of industries, different types of areas, and looking at building it based on certain context. And context is really important. So the context is who am I, what do I do, what activities do I do? So for example, if I am a large commercial construction company and I build skyscrapers, my falling from heights bow tie is going to be very, very different. A risk model will be very, very different to, say, a boutique builder that builds one-story homes for residential housing. So you need to be able to use the AI, and you still need to be able to provide some context, and that's what I'll show you shortly. In fact, let's do it right now. Okay, so I'm going to be looking at an existing bow tie, and I'll just, for those who haven't had much exposure to bow ties, I'll just explain the concept of bow ties briefly. I'll go to one that exists already, and then I'll build one manually, but really basic, like one box per whatever. So what we're looking at here is we've got causes on the left-hand side. So think of it as a cause and effect diagram. You've got causes, you've got an event in the middle with an associated hazard. So the event could be car crash could be the event, for example. Your preventative controls could be speed limiters, policing of alcohol and speed and so forth. So you have your preventative controls, and some of these will be critical. So they're the ones that if they're not there, the event is highly likely to happen. And they're the ones that you need to be monitoring. On the right-hand side, you have your mitigating controls. So if I go back to that car example, you have your crash in the middle, you've got your speed limiters and your policing and so forth. On the right-hand side, your airbags, your seatbelts would all be mitigating controls. So what you're trying to do is minimize the impact of the consequences, which is on the far right-hand side. So what typically happens with the bow tie analysis, and why it's only been used for critical risks in the past, is it's time consuming to produce this and to get it as thorough as you possibly can. So in this case, I'm just going to build one from scratch so you get a bit of an idea. So our Bowtie software allows you to do this. And in reality, people do a combination of this. They do a combination of this and they do a combination of using AI. But I'm just going to build one from, I'm just going to add a Bowtie. And inside here, I'm just going to sort of say car crash. So that's the risk model. Inside here, I'm going to add a hazard. So I'm just going to say the hazard is, say, maybe speed. But I'm not going to make this very big at all. The cause might be, one of the causes will be, let's not make it moving vehicles. That'll do for the moment. So speed will be the cause in this particular case. The preventive controls, and you can have as many of those as you want. So policing. It's good to have some engineering controls like speed limiters, if that was feasible. And on the mitigating controls, I'm going to add in, let's put in fatality for the moment, or serious injury, either way. And I'm going to put in seat belts. So that's after the event's happened, and airbags. Okay, so you can sort of see it's sort of quite laborious, tedious. If I had to do that for hundreds of controls and then do all of that work, I'm going to overlook stuff. I'm not going to sort of pick up everything that needs to be done. And at this stage, this is just a pretty diagram. But in reality, this has a lot more to it than just being a pretty diagram. It has content and workflow behind it. And I'll sort of talk a bit more about that later. But what I'd like to do first of all is actually focus on the actual using the AI to build a Bowtie. So in this particular case, what I'm going to do in this case is, rather than worry about that one, I'm just going to do a new Bowtie, and I'm going to use the Bowtie AI Wizard. Okay, with the Bowtie AI Wizard, I want to generate a Bowtie, similar to what I did there, but I want it to be comprehensive, and I want it to be useful, something that I can then look at verification of controls and a whole series of other things. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do working at heights. You can also see from my history of the text there, you can put in all sorts of weird and wonderful things, and it actually will still produce it. It's quite interesting. So from there, I can put in some extra context or some custom instructions as to what I want it to do. So the context or the custom instructions are really important. You can also have global instructions as well. So as I mentioned before, a Bowtie risk assessment is going to be different for an organisation working a 10-story building compared to someone working on a residential house. So the idea is I want to be able to have as much context in there as possible. So what I'd be doing is adding some custom instructions. So we're an 25 employee boutique home builder specialising in bespoke, etc., etc., etc. Then you've got a whole series of other things in here as well. I wanted to create multiple controls. I wanted to understand what a critical control is. So I've got some custom instructions there, and you can also have those set as defaults. So I click on the generate. Working at heights, and once I clicked on that generate button, what that then does is it comes back with some options with some items there. So if I don't like what I've got there, I can just say falling from height. I can add my own there if I want it to just. Actually, let's just working at heights is going to be the actual hazard itself, and in this particular case, the fall from roof edge, fall from ladder, fall from scaffolding. So let's do fall from roof edge, and we put our context there, and we can now generate our Bowtie. Okay, so that's now going across to a large language model, and that's going to now build the bow tie with the appropriate causes, and we'll have a bit of a look at that in just a few moments' time. By the way, if I'm not happy with that, I can go straight back to here and regenerate it again. So, and that's what I often do. I often look at it and go, I need some extra context. Maybe I can change some of the information in here or up here and then generate it again. But in this case, I think let's just see what it's actually produced for me. So I'm going to look at this area here. Now, in this case here, the blue ones are suggested critical controls. Again, it doesn't always get those right. Let's just zoom up a little bit. So inadequate edge protection on the roof, use of personal rest systems with anchorage points, etc., and so on and so forth. So you can sort of see that it's producing controls. And these controls, and I talked about systemization before, but these controls then go into a control library within your system once you've finalized it. So at this stage, it's still in the draft stage. So I might decide that I don't like that one, so I can remove that one from the list, and I might want to add my own one in there. I'll just call it test for the moment, but obviously I put in something that was meaningful. So I can still go through and fill this out the way I want to fill it out, remove things, add things, modify the text if I want to, and so on and so forth. So I've just built a risk scenario for a small builder working at heights, and it's got fairly specific things for that particular context. Now I could save that and move on, but let's actually do another one. So I'm going to take that context out. Oops, let's see if I can start from the top. Let's say we're a big construction company. So we're a construction company where we've got, we're mid-sized, we do certain activities, so we're telling it a lot more information. So I'm going to put that into my custom instructions, hopefully. Yes, I did. Okay, so mid-sized organisation operating in Australia with work, scaffolding. I can put extra information here, work in unpredictable weather conditions. So the more information you can get in the context, the better it actually will the more relevant that bow tie will be for you. So if I generate that bow tie now, what that will now do is generate based on the fact that I'm in a commercial sort of setting rather than in a residential working at height area. Now I could be talking about scaffolding, or I could be talking, whatever areas that I want to do there. So you can see there that I've now got adverse weather conditions that it's added in there, and it started putting in controls for adverse weather conditions and suggesting things that you should be monitoring. So what that's essentially doing, again, it's not going to be perfect, it's not going to get everything, but at least it's what it's doing is it's allowing you not to start from a blank page. It's allowing you to identify what are the things you can do to prevent this event from happening. What are the things we do if it does happen? How do we fail safely is the mitigating side. Okay, so once I've done that, I can save that. Now, the other thing I can do from here is, and that's just saving to the background there, is I can now go through, and what you'll see here, and this is where I was talking about systemizing it. Once we've built a bow tie and we've used AI, what we want to be able to do is create this in a systematic way. So these documents, so let's say we've modified it, we've reviewed it properly. We want to create the back-end records, and we want to put that into a system where we can put a lot more information in. So for your critical risks, what you want to be able to, or critical controls, I should say, what we want to do is have control owners. We want people who are responsible for managing these controls. Remember I said, if these controls fail, the dark blue ones, that event is highly likely to happen, and that's a fatality. So what we want to be able to do is build those back-end documents. Let me just actually do that now. So I'll create the back-end records. So that's going into the back-end system. And what it's doing is it's producing a record for each of these things where you can store a lot more information about the controls, the risk itself, And you can have workflows, reminders to review. You can have verification processes and link verification processes to each of these controls. So control is something that you're putting in place to prevent that from happening. You've got to verify it. Make sure that you've verified that control. Make sure you can also report on that control as well. Now, while that's going on, what I might do is I'll go back to here, and I think I'll just do a different scenario. So I promised that I'd try to do a few that were in the audience at the moment, and I'm going to see if I can see some examples.
We do. There's two that's come through, Adrian. The first one from Luke is a partial demolition of a building which needs to remain open to the public and operational during demolition.
Okay, so let's do that. I'll just take out the context there. So by removing this context, unfortunately, it's probably going to it may not help, but what I might try and do is actually look at, I can see that chat. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy some of that chat, and I'm going to copy it over into the custom instructions. So I'm going to put in demolition of building. Okay, so at the moment, I'm just going to do that. I'm going to also, in the custom instructions, put in partial demolition needs to be open and operational during demolition. So I'm going to copy that content, and I'm going to put it into here. So it understands the context of what we're talking about there, and hopefully it'll take that into account. So what I'm going to do now is look at to generate some hazards and events for the demolition of a building. So that'll, at this stage, just look at the hazards and the events. So it's going off to the AI. It's finished already, and it's come back with a hazard. So you might build multiple bow ties just from this general activity. So we might have exposure to airborne contaminants. Unless if Luke wants to add further details, I'm happy for you to do so. I'm just going to put that in there for the moment. So exposure to airborne contaminants. I'm happy to add more stuff in there in a little while. So let's have a look at there. We're going to say release of dust and asbestos fibres, inhalation of hazardous fumes, contamination of ventilation systems. Again, I don't know much about demolition, but what I'll do is I'll just paste one of these in here. So inhalation of hazardous fumes. I've put in some extra information here, but to make this really good, I'd want to put in a lot more context. I can only obviously put in enough of what I know. So that'll probably do it for the moment. I'll go off and generate the bow tie. But again, if I don't like what it produces, I'll go back to that screen and I can then modify that accordingly to build a better bow tie. So that'll probably take about 15, 20 seconds to build. It's generally fairly quick. Let's have a bit of a look at it. Again, as I said, we'll see what it produces. Inhalation of gas of hazardous fumes. If we look at the actual items, inadequate ventilation during demolition, use of hazardous materials or substances in demolition process, failure to isolate demolition area from occupied zones. So it's taking into account the fact that it's a process that's going while that building's operational. Ignition of flammable substances, releasing hazardous fumes, and then it's got the appropriate controls in here, which again you can add to this list if you wish to. Okay, so just maybe zooming up on that a fraction. Substitution with non-toxic or less hazardous materials, use of localized exhaust ventilation at fume sources, and so on and so on. Again, it's built the bow tie for me. At least it's a start. It may not get it completely correct. Sometimes I find the mitigating controls aren't quite right. But again, it's really just a matter of reviewing that. Let's do another one.
So another one we have in there is a collision between a light vehicle and a heavy mobile equipment. So I'm thinking in a mine site, this could happen. Between a light vehicle, so say a ute, and a D11 dozer.
Let's say shared vehicle, heavy and light vehicle. roads. Yeah, that might do. Okay, so I'll generate a new lot of hazards and unwanted events, and hopefully that'll come up with a collision. If it doesn't, I can manually enter it in there. So collision between heavy vehicle and, oh, that's pretty cool. Did it there. Unwanted event. Okay. The unwanted event. Causing vehicle rollover. We can do lots of different ones there. If we don't find out what we want, we can just add new there. So I'll just use rollover there. And I'll get rid of that bit there. I'm going to assume, as you said, it's a mining environment, which I've already said. Just so I can, I've got a context for a mining services company, so maybe I'll grab that and just paste it in there. I'm not sure if it's going to be the right context, but let's just put it in there. So the risk scenario applies to mining services sector, so I've just put in a fictitious sort of set of custom instructions. I'm just going to get it to generate the bow tie. Again, the more context and the better the context I can put in there, the better it's going to actually produce.
This is going to save so much time for people, isn't it?
Absolutely. Okay, so again, if I don't like what I've got, I can always go back to there and change the context and the instructions, which is what you typically do when you're working with the model. As you can see, it's a little bit more fun than starting from a blank piece of paper and then like building, these things manually. So maybe we'll zoom a little bit more just so you get a bit of a feel for it. So inadequate separation of heavy and light vehicle traffic. So it's coming back with options and controls that you should be putting in place. Poor visibility, excessive speed vehicles on shared roads, drive distraction or inattention, inadequate road services conditions. So if there was more that I hadn't considered, I could go back and say, consider these items as well. And it would then come back and modify those clauses and the controls and consequences. So this will come back with how you fail safely, what do you do when the event happens, and then what are the potential consequences. Okay, do we have any others?
Yeah, we do. We also have some good questions. I don't know whether we'll keep going with some examples. What time? Yeah, we'll do a few more examples and then we'll go to some questions. Is that okay with you, Adrian?
Yeah, for sure. And then we can go through how this is systemized and how it's then, verified.
How it comes up with it all. Perfect. That's where the questions are heading. So let's do the next one. Employee mental health deterioration due to chronic work stress. And I didn't put that one in, if that's what you're thinking.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Christina, you're not meant to be entering these things. Let's just do, I can't make these too long sometimes, so I'll just throw that into there. I've just done a thumbs up on that by mistake. That's okay, but it is a thumbs up anyway. So I'll say employee mental health deterioration, and I'll put in the chronic stress down here. So in this particular case, I'll get it to generate the hazards and events. I think it's done it already. Okay, so the hazard's the same thing there, it's just a hazard. And the event could be reduced concentration leading to increased accident risk. It could be a whole series of other impaired decisions, absenteeism and so forth. So let's put in absenteeism for the moment, and let's just put in activities. The chronic, see if I can spell chronic work stress is causing issues within our workforce. Again, I want to get some context, a little bit more context of exactly what they were doing and the activities and that sort of stuff. So, which would then give us a better bow tie, but at least it'll produce something. So chronic work stress is causing issues within our workforce. We need to measures in place. Probably in place. Probably didn't even need to do that bit, but let's just see what it generates. And I'll just say maybe create at least 3. You've got to be a little bit careful here. 3 controls per cause consequence. AIs will make stuff up. If I said create 50 controls per cause consequence, it would start to make stuff up. So you've got to be a little bit careful with what you actually do there. You try to keep it realistic, and 50 wouldn't be realistic anyway. So I'll get it to generate it. Hopefully I didn't miss anything there. And it'll now generate that. But again, obviously with a lot more context behind the organisation and the activities that they were doing, and the leadership within the organisation and the people that they report to and so forth. That would give us more, but it's actually produced something. So excessive workload and unrealistic deadlines is a cause. Lack of managerial support, poor work-life balance, inadequate mental health resources and support, stigma around mental health. And then it's got some suggested controls, preventive controls, and then some suggested reactive or mitigating controls to minimize those consequences. So again, remember, each of these can turn into a document with a workflow, with ownership, with extra information about how you manage that control, how you monitor it, and all that sort of stuff. So it all happens in the background. Okay. So let's maybe, do we want to do another example, or should we go to some of the questions? Maybe we'll go to some of the
let's go to some of the questions, because it might lead to some more examples anyway. One of the main questions from Luke again was, does this AI draw controls from all AS, NZ, ISO, other standards, and COP?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's going out to a large language model that has access to all of that information. And if you put that into the context, it will draw out controls based on that as well. So I haven't focused on saying, consider Australian standard, XYZ, or Australian standards, New Zealand standards, international standards, etc. But absolutely. But you're more likely to get a result if you actually prompt it correctly and give it, that additional context. And then it will start to, if I went back to some of these earlier ones and put in consider Australian and international standards, it would no doubt put some controls relating to those in there.
In addition to that, regarding the ISO standards, how does our LLM access them? Aren't they behind paywalls? That's what Libby has mentioned.
Yeah, you'd think so, but if you go to ChatGPT or any of those large language models and you ask about particular standards, they will come back with information. I don't know how they do it, but they do. Our model's talking to any large language model you want to point it to. So, and that's how we control privacy. So we can configure whether it goes to a closed model, which is stored in a Amazon or Azure data center that's not open to anybody else, or it could be going out to the normal ones with settings that say don't use it to train. But the way they're training these models is they're going across the internet, they're getting all publicly available information, they're having that information entered it's basically the entire internet that they're consuming. Even though they're behind paywalls, I've looked at standards myself for where ISO 27001 certified. And I've actually got a lot of information about ISO 27001 just by putting prompts into large language models. So yeah, I can't say how they do it,
yeah,
but they certainly do it, and it might be part of where they're getting information when they shouldn't be getting information as well. But the information is certainly there and accessible from the models.
Definitely a great question, Libby. Thank you. Another question from Libby is, how does our software decide what is a critical control, or does this information come from AI? What is the AI tool that you're using in the background?
Okay, well, it can be anything. At the moment, I think we've got this configured to ChatGPT, probably 4.0, but the 3 models are getting a lot better. Gemini's also getting a lot better, so we can configure this to go to any of those large language models based on what a customer prefers. So getting back to the first point of that question, how does it determine whether it's critical control? Again, you can put in global context. I won't go into that right now, but there's a setting that we can put in there to essentially give it instructions. So ICMM guides, for example, that's a body that's come up that's done a lot of work on critical control management. They've got guidelines on what is a critical control. So an administrative task is generally not a critical control. So what you can put in the context, the global context area, or even in this context area, you can see there's a lot of stuff that I've put down here anyway, further down. Of critical control must be a specific act, object, or technological system, not a general concept. It must directly prevent or mitigate the critical control. So information in the context. We also have a lot of general prompting within the system itself, but I also like to put a lot of direct information in the configuration and in the custom instructions as well as the overall instructions to tell it what is a critical control, what is a cause, what is a consequence. So it actually understands that and gets it right, pointing it to the ICMM guidelines, those sorts of things. So it's a combination of the prompting that's built into the system, as well as the additional instructions that you can give the system.
Amazing. Another question from Lucinda is, how do you capture escalation factors or defeating factors?
Yep. Okay, so again, that information can be stored inside the risk event or the controls, whichever is appropriate. And maybe it's time to actually build out one of these models and actually have a look and see what you then record. So bear with me for a second. So the bow tie itself at this stage it's a pretty diagram. It's a useful diagram, but it's a pretty diagram. It's allowed you to identify your controls and a lot of information. But then you've got to do something with that information. And I guess that's a good lead into the next section of the of the webinar. So when I looked at the first one here, this is one, in fact, I actually told it to generate back-end records for one of these. I'll just sort of see which one it was. It wasn't that one. I think it was, no, it wasn't that one either. I've done so many now. But what I'm actually looking for is it actually has like a little thing in the corner, the top right-hand corner, that actually then, there it is. It's actually just rebuilt the screen. So what I did before is I'm not sure whether I've covered a lot of ground today, but when at some stage I said create the back-end records. So what it's now done is each of these is actually a record in the background, including this one here. So I can click on the corner now, and that'll actually open up a document where I can go through and then I can populate the relevant information, and you can have whatever fields you want in these, in these forms, and whatever workflow steps. So you might have steps that, go from approved or under review to approved. You'll have things like owners or approvers. You might have risk matrices. You can see that the controls that we defined in the bow tie are actually listed in here. So they're showing as the it's coming up and it's records some information about the control itself. You can see as I scroll further down, it'll have further information as well. Now, if I'd gone back out of there and gone and clicked on maybe I'll just get rid of that for a moment, just tidy up after myself a bit. There we go. If I'd clicked on one of the controls itself and just click on the corner there, what that'll do is open up the actual control. So you'll sort of see here we've got a critical control management module, and we've got a global control library, and a control can actually be on multiple bow ties. So I've got the control open. I've opened up that control from the bow tie itself. Now, once I'm in there, we've got a whole lot of information that we can record. There are questions here that define, what is a critical control? How do we define whether it's a critical control? And that's all configurable within the system. So you can ask these questions here, for example, and then it says this is a critical control. Now, those questions you can tailor to your organisation as to what you define as a critical control. This is set up based on the ICMM guidelines, but you don't have to follow those. The bow tie itself, when it's generated through the risk assessment module, or through the bowtie generation and the AI, it's building it based on the prompts. So again, you can reprompt it. You've got the context and you've got the default prompt that you can put into the system to explain exactly what you think is a critical control. Now, one of the things that we're putting into the system in the next little while is the ability for the system to automatically populate some of the data that's put into here. So without going into too much detail about performance requirements, what dependencies there are and how do you measure performance activity and all of those sorts of things, we're putting in AI built directly into the forms that can then help with that. So it generates the information. But again, of course, you need to review it. You can't just assume that it's going to be 100% correct. Now, we've talked about AI generation of bow ties, and at this stage they're diagrams, and they're not terribly systemized. Well, they are, but you haven't seen the systemization quite yet and how it can be applied in a practical sense within an organization. So at the bow tie is the planning stage, and defining the performance requirements is also, and the controls and all those different things are part of your planning on how do you define your critical controls, how do you monitor them, all those sorts of things. Once you've done that, you can then integrate the bow tie and the critical control. Now, what I've got today is an example where I'm going to do an inspection. Now, it doesn't have to be an inspection. It could be an incident that's happening. It could be an observation. It could be anything in the system that generates a automated process. And that's what I'm going to do right now. So what I'd like you to notice, first of all, is everything's green. Everything's assessed, except for obviously these ones are still being reviewed, but everything's under control. So it's all looking good. I'm going to now go and do a verification, which is going to prove otherwise. So in the verification, in this case, we've got it set up as an inspection. So I'm going to jump over to the inspection. I'm going to choose the type of inspection I'm going to do. So that'll just be a straight general inspection. I'm going to create a record, and I've saved you the pain of having to force you watch me type in lots of information into a longish form. I've only made, there's only a few fields that are mandatory and they're already pre-populated. But what we've got in here is a series of questions, and they can be critical control verification questions. They don't have to be, but they can be. In this particular case, this is a critical control verification question that either the tags have been applied or they haven't been applied on an energized device. So I'm going to choose no, and that's a critical control failure. I'm going to put an observation and just say tags are missing. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to scroll down and I'll complete the rest of the inspection. So I'll just go on. You know, you can have whatever questions, whatever answers, whatever pictures, signature fields. You can do these things on mobile devices. You can do them offline and so on and so forth. In this case, there's no mandatory fields. I'm just going to mark it as completed. And what that's now doing is it's triggering processes which you can configure yourself. So you can set these processes up yourself as to how you want them to work. And it's now run those processes and the magic's now happened. Now, you haven't seen it yet, but the control owner, the critical control owner, would have been notified that there's an issue because a critical control has failed. A risk owner will have also been notified, and a whole series of other things. Let's have a look and see what the bow tie looks like now. So I'm just going to refresh this screen, and what you'll see in a moment is we now have a yellow bar against that, and it's now a change of status telling us that we have control issues. So let's open up that risk event, and again, I can scroll through that form. Again, all the fields there are configurable to what you want them to be. They're the controls, and whoops, I can see one straight away. That's the one that has a problem. It's red. Okay, so I can drill down into there, and it's opened up the control from the control library. I can scroll through this control, and if I go into the control history, I can see that a tag was not attached to a particular piece of equipment, a non-conformance was logged, so the control history was updated, and the control is not effective, and everyone knows about it. But more than that's actually happened. What else has happened? An action's been automatically assigned. Again, these are configurable processes that you can set up. An action's been automatically generated and assigned to people to let them know, hey, we've got a problem. you've got an action you've got to do. We've got to get this sorted out before we do have an incident. I'm going to close that one. What else has it done? Okay, it's also gone through and created a critical control verification. So if I go into my critical control verification form, every time you verify a critical control, again configurable, it can be a pass or a fail. Ordinarily, you'd hope to see lots of passes here and the occasional fail. So what that's actually done is it's created a document, and it's put that information. It's put information from the inspection, like the date and the risk that was being reviewed, the critical control that has a problem in this case, who verified it. So I'm logged in as Angela, so I was the one who verified it under that name. In this case, there was an equipment number assigned, and that it failed, and then a little bit further information that tags are missing, and then links back to the actual inspection itself. So it's created a verification document, and over time, you'd have potentially hundreds of thousands of these being generated without the person who's doing the inspection having to do anything beyond answer a question on the inspection. So action, verification, status changes, email notifications, a whole lot of stuff went on because we've had something that could cause serious injury or fatality if it's not rectified. What do you do with this? What you do with it is you put it into a dashboard. So when you look at your dashboard, you can then start to slice and dice the data because you can configure your dashboards. You start to slice and dice the information that's captured in those verifications, and you start to review it. So these are failures that we've had based on the risk events, or based on risk. We've got a particular critical control verification, and in this case, they decided to put a KPI to make sure we're doing enough verifications. We expect to do 4 verifications, and in this case here for the month of May, not enough were done. Now, if I scroll a little bit further down, and you don't have to do it this way, you can do it any way you like. You may not want to put it against asset numbers. You might want to store other information. But in this case, what we did is we were storing asset numbers and how many verifications we were doing against each of those assets. So I might want to say, let's just take the passes out and let's just look at the fails. So I can now see there's 2 fails and on those 2, and then 1 fail on that one. I can look at it a little bit more carefully as well. So that there is suspicious. Why did we only do 2 verifications? Maybe the piece of equipment was out of service. Maybe it's at the back of the workshop and no one can be bothered doing the verification because it's just too hard to get to. There can be lots of different reasons, but this is real-time data, and you can start to look at it over periods of time and start to see trends and start to see other qualitative information. You can even ask the question, why don't we have any fails on this one? We've done lots of verifications, more than anything else, but why is the fail? Why don't we have any fails? So you might say, well, maybe people are doing a tick and flick on this particular exercise and they're not actually paying attention to it. They're just in a hurry to get to what they need to do to finish their job. So you can start asking those questions. You can start putting extra prompts within the inspections to indicate this is a critical control verification, pay attention. They're the sorts of things you can do. So now not only are you planning through the bow tie to identify how you need to verify, you're now also measuring your verifications, and you've got very targeted questions that you can put into your inspections and into other things. You can connect to it through APIs, or you can do lots of other ways of getting data in here. But you can do all sorts of things in all sorts of different modules. Another example, and one of the things where people have been struggling, is to integrate critical control management or even risk management in general into their everyday processes. So as an example, in our incident reporting module, there is a question that says, did this incident occur, could be a near miss, for example, as a result of a critical control failure or a critical risk event failure? And if the answer is yes, it can ask you to say, well, go and update our critical risk module like it did with the inspection. So you could be putting it into your observations. You could be linking it to your maintenance module. all sorts of different options that you've got available there. Now, the other thing I didn't show before is that the bow tie also updates. So what you'll see is once my screen refreshes, that's the critical control that's failed or has become ineffective. And when I go into there, I'm now looking at the critical control directly from the bow tie, and like I did before, but just going through the bow tie itself. You can also see that we've got workflow steps for making it effective, both the control and the risk itself. So you might have extra questions, extra steps that you might need to do. And one of the things about critical control management is you're learning from failures. But in this case, nothing's actually happened. So people welcome the red. They've learned from something. They've learned that they need to improve the control, improve the performance requirements of the control, maybe even put in other controls to enhance it. But they're learning from the actual process itself before an incident's happened. So it's a very proactive approach, a measurable way of being able to look at those controls. So before you can mark it as effective, the control owner might need to mark it as effective. You might have other approval processes. It's entirely up to you how you do that. But the main thing is that there is a process for making sure that you've learnt from the failures of the controls and you don't end up in a situation where you have a catastrophic failure and the event actually occurs. From the initiation of the bow tie right through to the verification, and then it's a continuous improvement type process. So your verifications and your failures lead to you understanding what's gone wrong, improving the controls, and then it's a cyclical process again. You might have situations where you identify new controls. And one of the issues with bow ties that you've got traditional bow ties is they often just sit there in a place somewhere and they very rarely get updated. But when they're electronic, you can just go back in and say, okay, we've identified another control. We're just adding it to the bow tie and we're going to link that into our inspection processes or other processes as required. So the entire process is integrated and configurable, and it's not a one size fits all. It's configure it to fit what you need to do to prevent those catastrophic incidents from occurring and be more strategic about how you do that. So we've gone from risk assessment right through to the measuring type process into a practical solution that does the entire integration process. I'd like to thank everyone for attending the webinar today. If you need any further information, feel free to contact Christina, who can provide further information. We're always happy to talk to you about this. We're also happy to put you in contact with customers that actually use this solution, as it has significant upside and it's a very, very different way of doing health and safety. It's not focusing on just doing activities. It's targeted activities, very strategic, making sure you're focusing on what's important. Again, thank you for your time. Thank you.